us commit and constantly recommit ourselves to be a grateful nation. Can somebody say amen? Today, if you're visiting with us, we're in a series called A Day in the Life, and I've been preaching through the book of Luke, actually, right around chapter 4. I'm going to pick that up there next Sunday, but today we're going to do something differently. Yesterday was our 29th anniversary for Renee and myself. And it's hard to believe. I mean, she doesn't even look like she's over 29, which would be creepy, wouldn't it? Exactly. She always likes to remind me that when I got my license at 16, she was in the first grade. And that always bothers me when you say that. I'm 9.5 years older than Renee, and she likes to kind of work that in. Rick Warren said, we discover our role in life through our relationships with each other. And what we're going to do today is that we're going to take some time, and Renee's going to join me here in just a moment after I finish reading our text, that we're going to talk about our relationship. And I believe I think you're going to enjoy it. I think for some people, there's going to be some great value in it. And we're not upholding ourselves as the gold standard or God's standard. We're doing our best. We're a work in progress. But some of the things that we have kind of committed to in terms of principles and the promises that kind of come out of kind of planning your life and your marriage and your relationship that way. Now, you might be single or single again. And you say, well, I picked the wrong day to come to church. This is going to be a marriage talk. This is really going to reflect especially and expressly marriages, but it's also going to reflect just relationships, generally speaking. Renee said a number of years ago, and she was preaching, she said, the greatest message Todd will ever preach will not be behind a pulpit. And that was a remark that was intended to speak to our marriage and the life that we're building together. And if you have read before, and I'm going to reread it today through the Message paraphrase, Ephesians chapter 5, there's a parallel that is presented to us. It's a picture of Christ in the church, but also a husband and a wife. And as we're talking about a day in the life, Jesus prioritized relationships, and now in the bigger picture, his relationship with the church ought to be reflected between a man and a wife. So I want to read this morning. You can follow along on the screen. I actually brought my Bible. I have it here on my PowerPoint, but I actually brought my Message paraphrase with me today, and I'm going to read straight from it. And it's under the section in the Message, anyway, under relationships. Starting with verse 21, chapter 5. Out of respect for Christ, be courteously reverent to one another. Wives, understand and support your husbands in ways that show your support for Christ. The husband provides leadership to his wife the way that Christ does to his church, not by domineering, but by cherishing. So just as the church submits to Christ as he exercises such leadership, wives likewise submit to their husbands. Husbands, go all out for your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church. A love marked by giving and not getting. Christ's love makes the church whole. His words evoke her beauty. Everything he does and says is designed to bring out the best of her, dressing her in dazzling white silk and radiant with holiness. That's how a husband ought to love their wives. They're really doing themselves a favor since they're already one in marriage. No one abuses his own body, does he? No. He feeds it and he pampers it. That's how Christ treats us, the church, since we are part of his body. And that is why a man leaves his father and mother, cherishes his wife. No longer two, but they become one flesh. This is a huge mystery. I don't pretend to understand it all. What is clearest to me is the way that Christ treats the church. And this provides a good picture of how each husband is to treat his wife, loving himself and loving her, and how each wife is to honor her husband. So this morning, would you welcome my wonderful wife of 29 years to the stage, and we're going to saddle up on this nice, comfy couch. So out of what we just read in Ephesians chapter 5, I do have a couple of points, but we're just going to kind of talk back and forth, and we're going to work through this because there's a portion in here that is greatly misunderstood. And we've done enough marital counseling, either together as a couple with other couples or individually. She's met with wives, I've met with husbands. And there are some things that if you read it at face value and you really don't understand the context, or if you just kind of run with it, if you will, a lot of husbands especially get power tripping on where it says, wives, submit to your husbands. It's right there. It's right there. And she's not submitting to me, but they fail to have read the verse just before it, where it says that we are to submit to one another. And then it says afterwards how, okay, when the wives submit, the husband is actually like Christ to die. He is to die to himself. And what a lot of couples fail to recognize, because they both want to kind of get their own way, but especially with stubborn men that I've counseled with over the years, I try to tell these guys, if you will die to yourself, submission will never be an issue. Ever be an issue. If you will love her the way that Christ loves the church, she's not like, oh, I can't believe he's asking me to do that. I can't believe I've got to do this. I can't believe. Those things become non-issues. They don't even really exist because there's an understanding. So the first point this morning is your willingness matters. Your willingness towards your spouse, your willingness to obey and to submit and to yield and to kind of give way and make place for them. And that's very, very important. As we work through these things, they're all kind of interconnected. But Renee, why don't you I'm going to lob you the ball and you kind of take it away from there. Like you did in the first, you killed it in the first service. It's so awesome.
Yeah, they're all dead now. All the first service, gone. Killed them. Yeah, I mean, what you said about, wives submit to your husbands. When Todd and I first started out dating, he was the singles pastor at Phoenix First Assembly. And we had a singles group that was like over 300 people. It was a huge, booming, amazing singles group. And we would get, tons of young adults that were in there just starting relationships. And I can't tell you how many times I would have a guy come up to me and say, oh, could you talk to my girlfriend? Because she will not submit to me. And I'm like, yes, give her my number. I would love to take her out. And then they would break up. As soon as we went out and I met with that girl, they broke up immediately. But I mean, you said it right there. The scripture is so clear. And you said, men, if you're willing to die to yourself. But not only that, Christ died for the church. If you have a woman that you are willing to die for, you're never going to have to convince her to come alongside. And submission is easy when you know that it's love. There's an undying love. This person would give their life for me. And even in parenting our kids, when we would get to, how a point where we would need to discipline them, the key was always for them to know, because I love you, I can't allow this. You're getting in trouble because I love you, and I don't want you to go through life, with this behavior or this kind of, and when I always wanted to make sure our kids knew when they were getting disciplined, it was because of how much we loved them. We wouldn't allow them to continue on. And it's the same thing in marriage. Anytime there's an issue, and we've really never had struggles or battles because we just trust each other. We haven't had this, you've got to submit to, because of that love. I knew that he always was looking out for our best.
I thought it.
You thought it?
Yeah.
This is why never mind. Always looking out for my best interest and knowing that he's submitting to Christ first. Christ is the head of our marriage, and knowing that, he loves me more than anything, and anything that, he's proposing that maybe I'm not on board with. Like, I know that his relationship with God is solid. I trust when he hears from God, and I'm like, okay, go ahead. And we would pray. I mean, sometimes he would want to do something and I wouldn't want to, and I would just pray, God, shut that door if it's not you. And God would shut doors, and poor Todd, he would be like, what's the door shut? I'm like, yeah, that's weird, huh? God, like, but I knew at the end of the day, he's never gonna lead me anywhere that isn't God's perfect will, because I knew that first he was submitting to God and I was submitting to God, and I don't even know if I answered the question. But
I think that one of the things, especially for me, that I had to come into the understanding of, that when God creates a marriage, it's a gift that's given both ways. And we don't have the time this morning, but we were best friends in Master's Commission, and then we dated, but I was a horrible boyfriend. And horrible. And I had something dysfunctional within me. I had had 5 relationships prior to Renee, that, because I was older, and I had 5 relationships that right around the 2-year mark, I would do something to self-destruct it, sabotage. I would cheat on the particular girlfriend. I'd run around, do something. There was a tripwire, 2-year mark. So about 2 years in, I was acting like an idiot. I didn't cheat on her, but she ends up breaking up with me as we were dating. And it's one of the best things, that top 5, maybe even top 3, that ever happened to me. It was devastating at the time. Back then, back in the 90s, if you went to Phoenix First, the Dream City Church, the main campus now, there used to be 9 chairs up on the stage. There were only 9 pastors. It was a small pastoral team for the size of the church. And I would be up there, and she would be sitting with Master's Commission. She was in 2nd year or 3rd year, and I'd look up there, and I'd see her. And everybody thought that I was having this intense, intimate worship moment with the Lord, because I'd be like, they're like, look at that, Pastor Todd. He is so close to God. But I was crying over Renee. And I was flipping out, man. I thought, man, I don't want anything to do with this. And what the Lord showed me, one of the most powerful revelations I've ever had, was I asked the Lord specifically to take out that heartache, that grief, that loss, that mourning. I just wanted to get on with life. And the Lord basically said, I can't take the heartache away that I created. She's my best for your life, and you better get your act together, because you're going to miss my will and the best thing that it could ever happen to you in this life. And it was almost like I was sucker punched when I used to be a bouncer. A couple of times I was sucker punched, and you don't see the punch coming. And I was sucker punched by the Lord, because here I was known as Pastor Todd. Where's Pastor Todd? Oh, he's over in the sanctuary on the 3rd floor praying. That guy's praying all the time. And if he's not praying, he's reading his Bible. And man, that guy's such a God chaser. That wasn't untrue. But yet, while I was chasing God, I was disrespecting God, because to disrespect the gift of God is to disrespect the giver of the gift. And God said to me, he's like, Todd, I love you. I'm proud of you. I called you to ministry. But every time that you've disrespected, or you haven't appreciated, you haven't honored Renee, you have dishonored me. And from that moment, I changed. It's like I got scared straight, because I couldn't afford to have anything off track with God. And from that moment on, I recognized Renee's just not my wife. She's my gift from God. And that impacts your willingness. She's my gift. It's not really fair to her, but I'm God's gift to her. Not really a fair exchange. It's like, whatever. You know, I got a Ferrari and she got a Ford Escort. But your willingness, and when I was thinking about this sermon this week, one of the words, I looked it up in I don't know how many different versions, it said to yield to one another. And, you know, we know what that means most of the time. You're going to make way for somebody. But it hit me. I don't know why I never thought of this before. But I also thought that yield is a term that they use when they're bringing in the harvest. When things are bearing fruit, you bring in the yield of potatoes, the yield of corn, the yield of the peas. And I think that if we would yield to one another, we would have an unspeakable harvest. And we would have a bountiful harvest that is flourishing within the context of our relationships, our friendships, and what have you. Amen? Okay, so number one, your willingness matters. Number two, your words matter. It says here, and I read it from the Message, his words evoke her beauty. Everything he does and says is designed to bring out the best of her. Take it away.
Well, I mean, in everything, your words matter. And Pastor Tommy Barnett has always said, you get what you brag on. And that is especially true in marriage. You know, when you're speaking life into your spouse, Todd is my biggest cheerleader. And every time, I mean, when I'm preaching, he's on the front row, and sometimes it's distracting because he's like, ah, ha, ha, ha. I mean, he thinks everything I say is so funny, and he thinks that every point he's cheering me on, and he'll tell people, oh, Renee is the best at this, the best at that. Sometimes I'm like, God himself knows, like, she can't really do that. But Todd believes I can do every single thing. He's my biggest cheerleader. But man, that brings life. And you get what you brag on. And when you have somebody believing in you and encouraging you and cheering you on, it makes you want to rise to the occasion. And, you know, our daughter got married 2 weeks ago, which feels like 100 years ago, but also yesterday. But she had asked me to give a speech at her reception. And as I was prepping for the speech, you know, a lot of different things came to mind of what I could say. And one of the things I was going to say, which I didn't say, was, you know, when we presented our daughter on the day of her marriage to be given away to this boy, man, this man boy, who he fell in love with her because she was a product of what we had been pouring into her for 21 years. We had poured into, encouraged, we built this daughter on our words, on the way that we instructed her, on the way that her family brought her up and her relationship with God brought her up. That's what he fell in love with. So from the day she was born to the day of her wedding, she was a product of us. But from the moment she became his, from that day forward, she's going to become a product of what he pours into her, what he speaks into her, the life he brings to her. So if in 5 years he doesn't like her anymore, it's his fault because he's not pouring into her. He's not giving life. Like, he fell in love with this precious girl that spent our lives loving and cherishing and believing in and speaking life into. And so we run into it all the time, married couples who are like, man, I don't know what happened to her, or I don't know what happened to him. When we first met, we were head over heels crazy for each other. I'll tell you what happened. You happened to them. Yeah. You're not speaking life. You're not building them up. You're not loving. And it's amazing when you really start to do that, you get what you brag on. You get if you're speaking death into your spouse, you're going to have death in your marriage. But if you start speaking life, and when it's hard, what is hard to do is to speak life when you're not getting it back. And a lot of people will withhold speaking life because they don't feel like they're getting life. That's not a picture of our relationship with Christ. I don't know about you, but when Christ came after me, I wasn't giving him anything. I didn't deserve any of it. But nevertheless, he came after me. He chose me. He picked me up. He spoke life into a broken little girl that didn't deserve any of it. And when you make a decision in your marriage, and whether it's your marriage, your relationship, your parenthood, you know what? Instead of tearing them down, I'm going to start building them up, even if I don't get it in return. That's the most selfless thing you can do, but that is a true picture of what Christ did for us. And you will start to see the fruit of that, you will start to get what you brag on.
I think it's also important to note that you just don't do it because it's a photo op or that person, that spouse is there. I know that, because Renee's actually told me this, that through the years that I'll be counseling with someone, and invariably I seem to circle back to our marriage and we talk about something, then that person will go to Renee and say, you know, I was meeting with your husband. He just wouldn't shut up about you. But what do you think that does for Renee? Or what do you think it does for me when I hear from someone that when Renee was bragging on me, I wasn't there to benefit it in the moment, and yet the dividends that it produced was just huge. Now, something that I do personally, and I say this to the men, because we're not to be ignorant of the devil's schemes. I just admitted that when we dated, I was a bad boyfriend. And what I would do, I don't want you to take notes on my bad behavior. I want you to learn from my mistake. And we were dating. I never cheated on her. But I would preach on a Tuesday night, and there would be, you know, all these people around. And people knew that we were dating, but some of the girls were like, well, she doesn't have a ring on her finger. So they would wait until I would be done, and they would come up and they would say, I've never heard a preacher like that before. You might be the greatest preacher since John the Baptist, since Jesus himself. And I would be like, tell me more. And I didn't do anything to discourage that attention. And I was flirtatious. Like, again, I didn't cheat, but I didn't discourage that. And when we got back together and I recognized this is the gift of God, even in casual conversations after being married for 29 years, if I meet a woman for the very first time, just even shaking hands, more often than not, probably the first words out of my mouth are, have you met Renee? And that's very intentional. I'm sending a message that I'm happily married and I'm in love with my wife. You may, trust me, I've been around the block a long time. Ministry, it's squirrely. And the devil, if he can divide a house and break up a marriage, and I've got, quite honestly, I've got far too many friends that are called to preach the gospel but have ended up in divorce court. And it's a sad, sad story. So your words in all different kinds of saying, the Bible talks about it in Hebrews chapter 11. It says that we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, and how God basically framed our world. It's a construction term for our world, but your words frame your world. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. And any opportunity I get to brag on Renee, and out of the abundance of the heart, people know if you're, I don't like those people that are on Facebook that they work so hard to try to prove how awesome the relationship is, and you know that it's not. You just because you know them. And it's almost a desperate attempt. It's icky. People know if you're in love with the Lord. People know if you're in love with your husband or your wife. People know, because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And we need to have an overflow and watch our words. And our words ought to evoke her beauty, his strengths, those kinds of things. Lastly, point number 3, your wins matter. What I mean by that, and I'll throw you the ball here in a sec, is that it says very clearly here in Ephesians chapter 5 that a man does not hate his own flesh. He recognizes to win an argument at the expense of his wife is no win at all. To wound your spouse with your words or your whatever is to basically to take out a knife and to self-inflict wounds upon yourself. So there's only wins when it comes to relationships. Anything else, you can't say no, it's only wins, and everything else, you risk losing everything else if you're doing it at the expense of that person. And you got to be very, very mindful I'm not going to say something that's going to wound, or I'm not going to do something that's, because to hurt her is to hurt me. And after 29 years, the very thought of hurting her is enough to destroy me in my mind because I love her so much. And you got to know that your wins matter. But here's the thing, it's not your wins, it's your wins as a couple. And you got to be able to, the Bible says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. One of the things, my mother did a lot of things right. I'm a lot like my mother, for better or for worse. I mean, she was remarkable in some areas, and she was off the rails in others, and I'm exactly the same. But one of the things that my mother raised me with was like, Todd, it's not about who's right, it's about who makes it right. Be a man and make the first move. Even if you're in the right, go apologize. Go seek forgiveness. Go say you're sorry, even if you're in the right. And that, I gotta say, it's been a game changer. So we've had very few disagreements over the years, very, very few. But any time that we even get close to one, there's never been a time where within 30 minutes, it's not that we had a timer, click, it's like 60 minutes, but we just won't allow that to happen. We've never gone to bed angry with one another. And again, we're not holding ourselves up to the standard, but I rejoice in my heart that my kids have never heard me raise my voice to Renee, ever. And why don't you tell that story that you told in the first, about,
What did I say?
about one of the kids that were dating.
Oh, yeah. Well, so, and I'll credit all that to Todd, and I guess to his mom, because he literally is always the first one. Even if I'm clearly wrong, he's like, I can just be like, and he'll be like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it, I'm sorry, whatever. Like, he will immediately apologize. And man, that is such an incredible thing for a marriage, but what an incredibly powerful thing for your kids to watch. Because he's not just that with me, but if he ever feels like, oh, I was a little bit short with one of the kids, he'll go in and sit down and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Man, kids need more moms and dads that are willing to humble themselves and go in and say, you know what, I blew it in that circumstance. And that's been a powerful example. But I was mentioning in the first service, and I'd kind of forgotten about it, but there was a time when one of our daughters was dating somebody, and they'd been together for a while, and the relationship, they were bickering a lot and fighting a lot. And my other kids, the great thing about having multiple kids, man, they help you raise each other. Like, they all kind of get on board, and they're like, hey, this one's doing that. And you're like, whoa, you've got eyes everywhere, which is great. But the three other kids came to me, and they're like, hey, like, what are you thinking about this relationship? Like, we don't like it, and what do you think? And one of my kids said, they bicker all the time. And like, we need to talk to her, because that's not the kind of relationship you and Dad have. Like, we never see that with you guys. Why would they ever want to get in a marriage where there's just fighting all the time? Like, that shouldn't be like that. And as a mom, man, that was like the best gift I could have ever been given, to know that, sometimes you don't know if your kids are paying attention or watching, or if you're having an impact on them, but to hear them and go to that other child and say, hey, you need to break this off, because this isn't the kind of relationship you should have. This isn't the right person for you. And it's because they've never witnessed that in the home. They never witnessed a dad and a mom screaming at each other, or demeaning one another, or we were always on the same team. And I appreciated that in parenthood, because I have friends who, they're trying to discipline a child, and the mom and dad aren't on the same page, and they're, the kids, it's a recipe for disaster. And I appreciate that anytime I was trying to discipline, because he was the fun dad, and I was the one that would try to, like, okay, we gotta have some sort of order in here. But you would always, even if I said, hey, this needs to happen, you would always say, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever your mom said, that's what we're doing. But just that, to see that the kids are watching and to know that they wanted to model like their relationships with their spouses around what they saw. They didn't want, to have a marriage where there was constant, and not to say, you're never going to have disagreements or anything like that. That's crazy, but overall, like, you shouldn't be fighting and want to kill each other every single day. Probably not good. So I appreciate that they saw that and modeled it.
I'm not doing so great with the grandchildren.
No,
I'm not on the same page as the parents. Kate and Annie will bring over little Eldon, who's named after my dad, and they will want to discipline him, and I'm like, oh, he's a good boy. He's such a good boy.
I've had to say, hey, be quiet. They're trying to, because he'll try to undo any, correction that they do, because he's like, no, he's a good boy. He's a good boy.
I remember when we got back together, and by the way, this is interesting because some people will say, well, you mentioned that you had a breakup, and how did you get her back? I never got Renee back. And I tried. I never got her back. I said, well, you're crazy. You've been married for 29 years. No, God gave her back. Huge difference. When we got back together, and now we're making wedding plans, there was a pastors' convention in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Georgia Dome for 42,000 pastors for Promise Keepers. Renee always thought it was ironic that they planned it over Valentine's weekend. Here's 42,000 husbands in the Georgia Dome on Valentine's. She's like, no wonder they need to go to Promise Keepers, the idiots. Why would they plan it over? And I didn't even realize it, but one keynote speaker after another got up on the stage, and I was one of 42,000 listening. And they basically said, don't make this mistake that I've made. I've sacrificed my family in the name of my ministry. I sacrificed my marriage in the name of advancing the kingdom of God. And I walked away from that. That was in February. We got married in May. Walked away from that. I'm like, I'm not going down that road. I don't care if I miss promotions. I don't care if I don't advance. I don't care. I am going to make the Lord my priority, and then in second place, my marriage my priority. And many times when I would be interviewed, I was a senior pastor at 3 different churches over 20 years in a town hall setting. People would say, well, how do you balance that work life? Because the ministry has a lot of demands, and I would agree with them. There are a lot of demands. But for the record, my ministry will never come before my marriage. It will never. I said, I know there's extenuating circumstances as a pastor. Somebody's in a car accident. There's some surprise. There's an emergency, and you're available, and you shepherd people, absolutely. But I made my mind up, and every time I would be interviewed to be a senior pastor, and the 3 times I was interviewed, the 3 times I was hired, people would stand and applaud because they saw the collateral damage in times past. One of the things that Renee said, and I read it earlier, the greatest message that Todd will ever preach will never be behind a pulpit. And that's significant to me, and I'll tell you why. Because back in the 90s, now Pastor Luke, has taken the baton from Pastor Tommy, and their father and son, they're very similar, and yet back then we only had one church, and now it's multi-campus, and the dynamics and the org chart and the rhythms and the flow, it looks differently. So back then, we used to have a lot of guests, high-profile guests that were on television. Some of these guests would come in, and they were just phenomenal expositors, preachers, preach the paint off the wall. You're like, wow, you could give them the phone book, and you'd be crying and I got to get to the altar. He's only on the E's. It was just remarkable, and yet, as I saw behind, I got the view behind the curtain. They were horrible husbands. They were pathetic fathers. If I shared some of their names, you would be so incredibly disillusioned and disappointed. And I said, no, no way. I believe if I give my best to God and I give the best gift that he's giving me besides the gift of salvation is sitting right here beside me. And if I truly love God with my whole heart, I'm going to love this lady with my whole heart. It's the least I can do to show my gratitude to God and to Renee. And it's very easy in this crazy mixed up world. A lot of people, a lot of these guys that I've counseled with over the years, she's not submitting. I have a picture of a book here. Put it up. Love and Respect. I can't see if it's up behind me. It's a great book. You can take it down so people aren't distracted. But the book basically says husbands and wives have different needs. And it talks about it in Ephesians 5. It says the husband needs respect and the wife needs the love. But what happens is a vicious circle is created many times. The book talks about it so plainly that basically the wife, because she feels unloved, she starts to criticize and complain, which in turn produces in the heart of the man a feeling of being disrespected. The more that he feels disrespected, the more distance he puts between him and his wife. And the term in the book is he starts to stonewall her. The more that she is stonewalled, the more anxiety and even anger starts to mount, and that's a dead end. But if you will just yield, if you just yield, make the first move, put their needs in, and this applies to friendships, this applies to anything, man. It's not rocket science. But sometimes our egos and our pride and everything, hey, I've got an ego, I've got pride, but in the bigger picture, is it really worth it? Isn't it better? I love it. And now that our kids are getting married and they're always over, I don't like watching the shows they watch. They're watching the 30 Marvel movies. I tap out. I'm not in. The other night they watched Thor, and they got it all planned out, whatever. But I love it that there's laughter in our home. There's light in our home.